Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of Learning to Code with P5. In this video, we will try to create a mouse-controlled spiral and see how interaction generates geometric patterns. This exercise will also help us revisit some of our previously learned concepts such as loop, variables, transformation, and mapping. So let's get started. All right, so first things first, make sure that you've already remixed your project. I've already done so and given it a name. Once you've done that, let's start with something that we already know, right? So let's give our canvas a background color. You can give black, white, whatever, maybe I'll just keep it to white for now. And then we're going to start to create a circle. Remember, what we are trying to achieve is basically create a spiral. So the first thing that we're going to start off with is basically creating a circle that we already know of. If let's say we want to create it at the center of our canvas, we are going to have it width and height divided by 2. And this is the first arbitrary size that we have given to our circle. So, and maybe also it's a good idea that we give it a no fill at the moment. All right, of course it doesn't show because our background is white already, but we are just giving it an outline for now. Okay, so now we have at least one circle, which is at the center of our canvas, something that we already know of. But imagine, what if we wanted to create lots of circles, right? What if I wanted to create 50 circles or 100 circles? We've already learned that that's not a good way to actually go one by one in creating those circles. A good way that we can make use of it is basically using a for loop, remember? So the syntax for for loop is, I'm going to put everything that I want to be created inside. That's what I'm going to do firsthand. And then we have the syntax already, right? We are going to start by adding a counter. We are going to give it a condition and we're going to have an increment. So let I is 0. I is less than, I don't know, maybe we are creating 50 at the moment circles, and then I++, which is saying that, okay, increase by 1 each time. Maybe a good idea for us to do is, instead of giving a hard-coded number here, we can create a variable and put the number inside. This way, what happens is, later on, if I want to make this as, instead of 50, as 500, like if I want to create 500 circles or 10 circles, I don't need to change it everywhere in my code. So I'm going to change this to this variable that we have created. Okay, so, and here our glitched again. So I'm going to exit this page for a second and let me just quickly refresh it back. All right, so yeah, where was I? Okay, so what we are saying is that here within this for loop, make us 50 circles, which are all 100 in diameter. The thing is that because it is each of these circles that are that is created is all 100 in diameter, so it seems like it's just one circle because all of these are superimposed on each other, so we can't tell the difference. We can actually make the size a bit dynamic. So what we can say is, just for our sake, so that we can see all of the circles, what we can say is, okay, starting from a circle which is at least smaller this size, go all the way big, so that we have created from this all the way to this much, hundreds of them, right? Or 50 of them, whatever the number we are going to put in this one. And all of them will be actually created from the center. So that means that if we want the size to be increased, we need to make this a variable instead of a hard-coded number. So let's create a circle here. Let's call it diameter. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our previously learned concept of mapping, right? So what I can do is I can map this whole index, which is I, starting from 0 and all the way to as many number of circles I've asked it to create, and it's going to do this for us. So we need 5 parameters for our mapping function, remember? So what we want is basically to be mapped is the index number here, which means our I, right? That's our first input value. Then our second and third value are the minimum and maximum values of this I, right? So starting from 0, which is the first circle that's being created at index 0, go all the way to num -1. And why we are doing num -1 is because if you remember that the counting starts from 0. So all the way from 0 to whatever the value of the num is, -1, so that we have the total number of circles as we want. In this case, since it's 50, so starting from 0 all the way to 50 -1, we are still going to get 50 circles. That's what we are doing here. And then what we are going to map it to is basically we're going to give it a certain diameter. So in this case, let's start off with, instead of 100, let's start off with 20, and I don't know, go all the way to 500 at the moment, and then see how that kind of turns out to be. Right, so here then in this case, instead of saying it 100, I need to change this to the variable that we have just created. And also I'm going to do one more thing, which is basically I'm going to also shift, and why is it saying it's not, there's a syntax error on line 17. Great, because instead of me putting here commas, I have accidentally put semicolons, of course. And now we can see all of these circles appearing, right? So what's happening here is that this first one, which is being created here, as you can see, is 20 pixels in diameter, and the maximum one is basically 500. So now this is basically a fixed value. First of all, also because we are creating all of them here, I don't think so that we need to use this here. I'm going to put it 0, 0, and I'm going to translate it here. So it is being just done once. All right, of course, because it was 0, 0 before I put anything, it actually went all the way to the top left corner of the canvas. Anyway, so now that it's kind of sorted, right? So we can also make this a bit more dynamic. So instead of, let's say, if I want it to be mapped to our mouse Y, imagine I'm saying that starting from 20 pixels in diameter, the maximum size is dependent on whatever the mouse Y position is. So that's one way of actually doing that. But if I go all the way, let's say at the top, if you can see where my Y position is 0, all of them are so concentric, you can literally see no circle in the middle. What I can do is make sure that I add 20 plus. Why? Because I've already given the first one to be at least 20 pixels. So that way what would happen is that if I end up creating something, let me refresh my page for a second. It's kind of giving me errors, but anyway, so if I end up going all the way to 0 on my Y position, I still see at least one circle, which is 20 pixels wide, and then I can see all of them. I mean, all of the circles are there. It's just that because they have to be confined within those spaces, so they become either closer or far apart, but I still see all of them. Okay, so that is one way that we are actually able to create the circles. All right, so now what we need to do is, let's say because we are thinking of actually our main goal is to end up creating a spiral, right? So now that we have so many of circles, we can kind of move them and rotate them around in a spiral format. So that way we know that our rotate function is going to come in very super handy. So let's say we know that we can do rotation. How we can kind of do that is, I'm going to add a rotate function here. So let's say if I rotate it using, we can actually put any kind of value in terms of using either pi or using degrees, with the radians function if we want to do it. I'm going to just make it a bit more dynamic here and try and play around with the frame count. So right now, let's say if you can see here, I don't know in the video if you can see it or not, but it seems like it's a disk moving. Let me try, and if you can see it, these are all circles which are rotating, but we can't really see, just like a disk. So remember why we can't see that? Because these are circles. Imagine if they were rectangles And if I had started rotating, because they started from the top left corner, you could have actually seen the rotation much more better. But since they're circle and it starts from the center, if they keep rotating, it's just the same thing, which is kind of a bit difficult for us to see. It might come across as an optical illusion at this point in time. But for us to actually get rid of it and see it in a very nice way and actually convert it into a more spiral format is that if we change its mode. Remember, our rect mode by default is the corner, which is the top left corner. And for the circle, it's already at the center. But we can also change for the circle to be the corner. And the way we can do it by using this mode, which is called ellipse mode. So there is no circle mode, just the way we don't have a square mode. We have either a rect mode or an ellipse mode, which can control all of them. And it has a specific syntax that we need to follow. So I'm going to say ellipse mode as center, corner. So if you can start seeing now, it has actually gone super crazy right now. And because of the frame count, which is being increased, we can actually try and slow it down. So let's say if I make it, first of all, I'm going to keep the size a bit smaller just because my mouse is now up here. You can actually see it's still kind of fast. I don't know, maybe if I can make it a bit. It's much more contained. However, our frame count keeps on increasing, right? Because our program is running, so the frame count keeps on increasing. And that way, that value is being changed as well. So if I move it a bit down here, you can see these are super big in size. Why? Because our diameter is already mapped to mouse Y, right? And if I go a little bit up at the top, now you can see they're much smaller. And you can see a kind of different sort of generative pattern, geometric pattern being emerged. One thing that we can also do is that, let's say if we are already controlling the size with mouse Y, right? Maybe we want to map our mouse X to control the rotation of the spiral. And that could be another fun way to actually do that. And so we can literally change our frame count from, from frame count, we can actually replace it with mouse X. So in this case, you can see if I'm here at the top versus I'm here at the very edge, you kind of see a different kind of pattern. And of course, it's going to be either big or small or big, depending on where my mouse is. So now we have an interactive geometric pattern, which is being created based on where the position of our mouse is, right? All right, so now we already have a spiral, which is basically not filled with any color. It's just an outline. We can control the size, make it big or small, and we can control its rotation as well. But let's try and have a little bit more fun and add some color to it. Of course, we know that if we want to add color, we can actually use a fill function, right? But remember, we are creating, let's say, these 100 circles. Okay, so no, not 100 circles. We are creating 50 circles here, but I can actually change it to 100, and we don't need to worry about anything changing in our code, right? Because we've given it a variable. So imagine now I'm creating it in terms of 100 circles, and now my interaction is totally sort of like the pattern that we see is a bit different, right? Very spider-like in the center. So you can literally create, you don't have to worry about anything in terms of our. Of course, there's a limitation to how much your computer can support. So I'm going to go back to 50 at the moment and not let it go super crazy because it's going to literally die on me otherwise. All right, so we have, okay, so where were we? Okay, so now we're going to try and fill each of these circles with some sort of colors. We can actually play around with some random colors, but there's another way if we want to control the kind of color that we want to play around with. And, we have, by default, the fill function takes up RGB as a value, which is red, green, and blue values. But it's a little difficult for us to control the kind of colors that we want to create. If you remember the color wheel on the spectrum, so it's literally a circle, right? You can see a whole gradation being changed. What if we want to make use of that instead of us filling out either some kind of random value, but we want to control the colors that we can create? One thing that we can do is, first of all, we will change our color mode to HSB. We can make use of the color wheel through a color mode HSB, which is basically hue, saturation, and brightness for each of them. The difference for these is for RGB, it takes up the values between 0 to 255, whereas when it comes to hue, saturation, and brightness, which is HSB, the first value, the hue, is basically the color that it takes up on the entire spectrum of the circle. So remember, our circle starts from 0 degrees and goes all the way to 360. That's why, we already have the minimum value as 0 and the maximum, which is 360 for this one. The saturation and brightness is basically saying that, okay, I can be going from either 0 to 100, if it's fully saturated or fully bright color. So what we will do is now we will try to fill this out. Of course, we're going to use our fill function inside. Why? Because we want each of these circles to be filled out. So we are putting it in our for loop. And for our hue, the first value that we will give, because we want each of the circles to be of different colors. So that means that we need to change it to some kind of variable, right? So that is one thing that we know already. I'm going to comment this for now. And then our second and third value, we can kind of play around with later as well. So let's create the variable here first. Let's call it H for hue, simple. We're going to map it again using something similar, right? Because we want to fill each of the circles, we are again going to use our index. This is the input value starting from 0, which is the first circle being created, all the way to the last circle, which is now -1. And then what we will say, what we are saying at this point in time is if we need to give it a range, right? So it's going to be between 0 to 360, min and max. So we can literally use those as our minimum values and our maximum values. So here in function now, what we can do is we can literally use H, the variable for hue, and we can give it a full value between, fully saturation and brightness. And one thing that you can now see is that we have our amazing. So now we have this spiral being created. You can see the first circle, which is kind of deep inside, starting from red. Of course, this is 0, and all the way on the color wheel, if you see, go back to 360, it's ending at red, and that's the kind of spectrum that we are already getting as well. So, you can see your entire thing here. What we can do, one thing here is that I can remove the stroke, maybe, and now you can actually see the whole color spectrum coming along, right? If, let's say, we want it to be not fully opaque and we want to play around with its opacity, remember the fourth value in our fill function is basically the alpha value, which controls how transparent or opaque the shape's color is. We have the same thing for this one as well, but in HSB mode, the value is not between 0 to 255 for alpha, it's between 0 and 1. What it is saying is that, let's say if it is 0.5, I'm going here, which is actually telling it, okay, it has to be 50% opaque, right? So it is adding some kind of transparency, which is right now at the most 50%. If I say 0.3, of course, it's going to be different, right? It's way more transparent. If I go all the way to 0.1, you can see. So basically 0 is the most transparent, all the way to 1, which is going to be fully opaque. So I'm going to keep it now for, I don't know, we can keep it for 0.5, and that's fine too, depending on how bright or how transparent you want the spiral to be. Okay, so that's one. Right now we are making use of the entire color spectrum from 0 to 360. But let's say if you wanted to reverse the order, right? Maybe you want, you can totally switch this as well. So you can start from 360 and switch those values as well. So now you can see that, our the colors have been flipped, right? So all the red to pink and turning to blue ranges are inside, and now it's kind of shifted where we can see the yellows and greens mostly outside, because we have reversed the order from 360 to 0 in our mapping function. That's one way. Again, going back, you don't even have to use the whole color wheel spectrum, right? What if, let's say, I'm going to switch it back. I'm starting and ending from 0 to 100. Right now, I can literally see all the way from red and ending at green. Okay, maybe I don't even want any kind of red. I can start with 0, and that's totally up to you. You can literally play around with it and see. And now I'm only getting a full range between, from the blue and green range. I don't even know if it's full, but maybe we can also try and see. Okay, we are kind of close here. But this is basically, I'm just showing that, you can literally switch. If I start from 250 and then end at 100, you will see the color being flipped again. You can literally play around with whatever colors that you want to play around with. If I want it to be between 250 and 360, now I'm getting all the purples and red hues and all of those, right? So you can, you have a lot of more freedom as well, but also you can control a lot of your color palette using HSP values. What I will leave you with is, now that you know that you've created circle, through circle, you've created spirals, you can create and generate as many geometric patterns as you want. You can play around with colors, have your own aesthetics, and see how that turns out to be. So I'll see you in the next video.